going into is actually interacting with natural soil. I think a great place to start is a small garden, even if all you're growing is a parsley plant on your windowsill, right? Most houses lack soil in any form. So bringing soil into your house is really important. Whether it's in the form of houseplants or whether you're growing a little something, and then having soil that you have access to. I'm particularly a big fan of people getting out and barefoot onto soil, getting barefoot into their gardens, going out foraging in that way. So that's one direction. Okay. Again, if you were somehow ended up on this interview, listening to this interview, and you're just pulling out of McDonald's right now, and you're going like, where do I start on any of this? I'm foraging. What are you talking about? Right. Where you start is you pull into the next health food store you see and you buy some fresh organic produce. That's where you start, right? Mm-hmm. All this other stuff is more advanced. You start there, and then you start buying organic foods, and you start eating whole foods, and then you start moving towards connecting with local food production, and then you start moving towards some food sovereignty where you produce food yourself. But so that's a progression. But I would like to say this about food. I think this is something people don't realize about how their body actually works. Do we have time?
We have time we have as much time as you would like to give.
Fantastic. So I like this saying, you are a tube. Mm-hmm. And I sometimes will say, you tube to people. You're a tube. And what I mean is you are literally a tube that starts at your lips and goes all the way down to your anus. Uh-huh. That tube, your gut tract, none of that tube is inside your body. That tube is actually the outside of your body. This is going to sound really weird, so give me a moment to explain. If I was to take one of those big tire intertubes, you picture what I'm talking about, like comes out of a tractor tire, like people would float around in the water in?
Mm-hmm. Right.
If we were to take one of those big tubes and we laid it on the ground and we stepped into the hole in the middle of it, would we be inside the tube? Or would we still be outside the tube?
We'd be outside.
Outside the tube, right?
Yep.
To get into the tube, we'd actually have to puncture the tube, correct? And then we would be inside where all the air is, correct?
Right.
That's the inside of the tube. If I'm holding a donut and I put my finger through the center of that donut, I'm not inside the donut. I'd have to break the donut skin to get inside the donut, right? If I took a bunch of donuts and I stacked them up so I've created a cylinder, and I put my finger down in that cylinder, I'm still outside the donuts. You're a big tube. You're kind of like a stack of those donuts. The tube runs from your lips all the way down your esophagus, into your stomach, through your small intestine, your large intestine, and out your anus. And all of that is a tube that's technically still outside your body. So when you eat something, it doesn't go in your body. It's outside your body. It's inside the hole in the tube.
Wow.
The only way it can get in your body is to be broken down small enough to be absorbed through the walls of it, and or there's a break in there, like what we call leaking gut syndrome, that can allow something in. But otherwise, does that make sense? All that's the outside of your body. That thing is filled with microorganisms. Remember I said you're 10 times more microorganisms than cells. Those microorganisms don't live in your body or you'd have an infection. If microorganisms get inside your body, you get an infection. So they actually live on your skin, and that skin is contiguous around the outside of your body and around through the gut tract, which is actually still technically outside your body. Does that make sense?
Right. Okay. So
that's a really interesting way to look at it. So you don't actually put food in your body. You put food basically against the skin that's in the tube inside of your torso.
Wow.
Now down in there, what happens is you break that food up through the chewing process, through the digestive chemical process, and you break it down into a kind of soup, and it mixes with all those microbes that live inside that tube. And what you do is you create a kind of soil. And then the fingers of your intestine, the microvilli of your intestine, there are all these little protrusions. They're like roots. The roots of your intestine reach into that soil that's made of all the food and microorganisms inside there. And like a plant, you have these roots that suck up that soil into itself. A plant has to stay put because its roots are down in the soil. You get to carry the soil around in a little pocket inside your belly. So you get to be this like walking plant.
Wow, so
so you get to, go ahead.
You're like an infolded garden then.
Correct. And you get to choose the kind of soil that you feed on because you make it with the food you eat.
Wow.
And when you live in really sterile environments, and when all the produce you've eaten has been sterilized, when everything we've eaten has been totally cooked down or canned up, or where we're not eating naturally fresh foods and we're not interacting with soil, the diversity of the microbes in our bodies or on our bodies starts to diminish. And what we're seeing now is that that's actually more crucial to your health than a lot of the things we used to think. That having diversity of organisms, literally good quality earth, literally.
Wow.
And that's what soil is. One handful of soil, one small handful of soil, this is a cool fact. If you were to scoop up a little handful of healthy soil, there are more organisms in that soil in your hand than all the human beings who are alive now added to all the human beings who've ever lived in the history of Earth.
Whoa. Wow.
Soil.
Serious?
What is soil? Soil is essentially, here's what soil is. Soil is living microbes and the bodies of dead microbes mixed with rotten food that was cells. That's essentially what soil is. Soil is a living thing.
Wow.
Soil is not dirt. Soil is not sand. Soil is a layer of living, decomposing, and living organisms, all symbiotically working together. Nature is a massive synergy of organisms, and we're meant to be part of that. Our biggest error is thinking human beings are somehow separate from ecosystems, or we're somehow separate from nature. There's nature, and then there's us, and they're different. We have this idea of got to get back to nature, like we're not part of it. So we actually think we're going to live in a sterile bubble. And we actually try to sterilize everything around us, and that's a huge mistake. And like I said, more and more research is coming to the forefront, showing us that the challenges with that. And one of them is that if you're not exposed to a diversity of soil microbes as a child, you have difficulty producing enough serotonin later in life. Means you'll be a more depressed person, a less happy person. That's just one statistic. And interestingly, how do we get exposed to all these microbes? Because we walk around on all fours and we put our hand in our mouth, and so we end up ingesting a lot of soil. My godson comes over to my house, he digs up my houseplants and eats the soil. Watch him do it. It's so fascinating.
I would expect nothing less.
Watching his instinctive drive to get soil into his body. So we are meant to have a rich diversity of organisms living on us and in us. We're meant to interact with soil, and we're meant to eat fresh, wholesome things that grow up from that soil while those things are fresh in our environment. Right? We're not meant to be eating food that's grown in California and shipped all the way to Norway. We're not meant to be living in New England eating apples from Peru. And this is a weird way to live because things are not fresh. They're bringing organisms that are not native to our environment. They are degrading in their nutritional value on their trip. And by the time they arrive to us, they have a very diminished vitality. This is not the way. The way that makes sense is that we are a symbiosis of the organisms in our environment, and we're meant to eat from those.
So now when someone eats and they swallow some bites of food and there are these organisms in their body, I've heard recently that we're down to about 300 out of 1,000 different organisms that we're supposed to have. We only have about 300 from the last latest research I've looked at. And so we're down 70% of the organisms that are inside our body. And this is most likely, what do you think, is causing diseases and causing the inability for us to be able to digest our food through the villi and all of that kind of stuff, right?
So okay. Now, one thing I want to point out, this is one of those, there's that like shocking thing, like we're getting ready to send probes over to Titan to look for water, and we haven't even explored our own ocean yet. It's one of those weird things about our civilization. We have, named every species we can think of, but nobody has yet really cataloged and named all the organisms that we know live within our gut tube. So these are estimates. We're not really sure even what lives in there and what's supposed to live in there, on and on and on. What we do know is that when one organism disappears, other organisms can rise up that have been kept in check by that organism.
Oh.
So, for instance, we're hearing more and more about candida infections, right? It's important to understand that candida is supposed to be there. There's no question about that. You don't get rid of candida. Candida is kept in check by somebody else. It's kind of like cops and robbers, right? If the organism keeping, like let's say lactobacillus is keeping candida in check, and lactobacillus is like the good guy and the bad guy is candida. But it's okay. There's a balance. But then we take an antibiotic that wipes out one like lactobacillus is gone for a while, now candida can run wild. And once it's gotten to a critical threshold of population, no amount of lactobacillus is able to get it back in check effectively. Does that make sense?
Wow.
Yeah.
So part of what's happening for people is that they have these chronic internal infections where certain organisms are actually taking over because of the imbalance. And yes, I would agree with you that in order to produce even some of the vitamins that we need, they're produced by organisms in our gut tract. I think vitamin K is an example of this. Mm-hmm. So we need to have the right flora there. That's really crucial. And I would also say that this diminished organisms in our body, it would be interesting to see who they're testing. Right? So it'd be interesting to see what part lifestyle plays in that. I suspect that people who spend a lot of time outside in the forest, people that walk barefoot in the woods, people that garden, people that hunt, people that forage, people that eat fermented foods would have a far richer diversity of organisms living on and in their gut tube than people who are living on an antibiotic sterilized lifestyle, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Important to understand now, if we were to look at human civilization in its current form and we were to say what is the pinnacle medicine developed so far, the one that's defined us as a civilization, it would be antibiotics.
Right.
Antibiotics have allowed human beings to overpopulate the earth because without them, we would have had many plagues by now that would have kept our population sort of in balance.
Okay.
We've been able to go past carrying capacity of our planet by using antibiotics. Now, antibiotics are like I kind of picture them as being the communal wafer of our civilization. Right? We, rather than going to the church, we go to the hospital. Instead of the nun, we have the nurse. Instead of the priest, we have the doctor. Instead of the communion wafer, we have the antibiotic.
Wow.
Very similar system. Very similar system. Something's wrong, you go to confession. Something's wrong, you go get a checkup. It's very similar. Uh-huh. The antibiotic, literally that means anti-life. It's the anti-life pill. And the solution to everything for them is to kill everything around, right? It's a scorched earth philosophy. Okay. So the idea is we'll burn it all down. When you take an antibiotic, it doesn't just go pick out the bad guy in you and kill it. It kills everything that it can. Right. And the problem is certain organisms that you got passed on by your mom, certain organisms that you got maybe through breast milk, certain organisms in your flora blueprint that came, or sort of fingerprint that came from literally your passage through the birth canal, certain organisms that you picked up from soil microbes when you were a child, once they're gone, are very difficult to repopulate. Mm-hmm. And the problem with antibiotics is that they don't selectively choose what they eliminate, and they destroy our unique microbe fingerprint in our body. So one thing people need to look at is really how can they avoid using antibiotics. One approach now that's emerging is a probiotic approach. I love that. It's like, great. I love this idea of pro-life as opposed to anti-life, right? Yeah. This idea that what we're going to do is feed in the good guys rather than just go around killing good guys with the bad guys. So one thing that's really important, and we see that this existed all through human history, is the consumption of foods that have been cultured or fermented. In fact, there's some people who relate the term culture when it refers to a people group and culture when it refers to a fermented food as one thing, that a culture was defined by the way it cultured its food, if that makes sense.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, really fascinating, right? So right now we're seeing, of course, the European cultures of that come from those herding people, the yogurts and the kefirs. We're seeing the Russian drink kombucha coming to the forefront. Now Juns as well are getting very popular. Uh-huh. More and more, we're seeing all of those krauts that I think come from the Germanic peoples, right? Where they actually take the Brassica oleracea cabbage, shred that, ferment it in lactobacilli. So we're seeing more and more fermented foods coming to the forefront, and they're getting incorporated into our diets. And this is really important and very effective way to replenish the flora in our body. So that's important in addition to our contact with soil. And the approach of getting good, healthy food, soil microbes, and fermented foods into our body is like an antidote to the antibiotics we've taken and can help to protect us from the infections that lead us to wanting to take antibiotics again in the future, if that makes sense.
So it's about us becoming stronger versus destroying our own internal terrain in order to deal with some sort of crazy bacteria that we get exposed to.
Right. Let's say that we're foresters and our job is to maintain the health of a forest. And we see that there's some kind of caterpillar that's destroying the trees in that forest. Mm-hmm. One approach would be to help to restore the health of that environment, because we would see, hey, these caterpillars are destroying these trees because these trees aren't healthy. And the diversity of organisms that kept those caterpillars in check is gone. So let's restore the diversity, rebuild the soil, and rebuild the health of those trees so those trees can fight off that caterpillar. And so that the other organisms are there, maybe the birds come back that were eating those caterpillars to begin with. That's one approach. That's like the probiotic approach.
Okay.
The other approach is like the antibiotic approach. It's that these caterpillars are taking over this forest. Let's fly jets over and drop napalm on the forest, burn the whole thing down. That'll get rid of those damn caterpillars.
Yeah. Yeah. There's no real awareness of how life interacts with one another, you know?
Yeah. So ultimately, what we end up with is this: we need an approach to reintegrate with the element of earth. It's got to look like this. We've got to have contact with earth. We've got to eat whole, fresh, local things that grow up out of the earth. We've got to understand that from the time we put it in our mouth to the time it comes back out our butt, we're actually making earth. We are soil producers.
Okay.
Us eating creates a surplus of soil. So you're making soil, and you have this opportunity to make healthy soil by making sure that you're eating food that is rich in organisms, right? This whole idea of pasteurization and eliminating the organisms in food is crazy, because we're actually supposed to be eating them. So we need to produce good quality poop, and then that goes back into our environment. It's actually supposed to be the cyclic connection with the earth element. We've cut ourselves off from that in just about every way we can think of. So now the approach is file one, earth. What do? I start moving towards organic food. If I can, I move towards local food by connecting with farmers or CSAs. If I want to go past that, I start growing my own food locally, sustainably with some permaculture. If I want to go, and by the way, at surthrival.com, we have a seed kit that we've just come out with, the 2013 version of it. It's 90 varieties of all organic, all heirloom, all open pollinated, non-GMO seeds, all designed to grow really vigorously with minimal input, lots of wild plants, lots of medicinals, lots of foods, with a permaculture growing guide, 30,000 seeds sealed in a can will last for years, so that you can start your own ecosystem at home, because that's kind of our goal, is to get people to start this.
Right.
And then the next level past that is where you go towards actually learning how to forage a little bit, which is a really fun thing to do and a fun hobby, way better than golf in my opinion. So we move in that direction, and again, we get out of this sterility mindset. You know, a lot of people, you know, right now, another one of the epidemics we haven't touched on is allergies. And there's an emerging belief that the allergy problem may be due to the extreme sterilization of everything. And that without the organisms that are supposed to live on us, we become susceptible to allergens.
Wow. Yeah.
So again, I think we get stronger when we start to integrate back into the environment. I hope, if anything, what comes out of this conversation that we've had today is that people hear that the boy in the bubble approach is not working. Cutting ourselves off and trying to live in an isolated, sterile bubble is not working. It works on science fiction movies and television shows. It looks like super cool, like it works.
Makes for
but
good
when
stories.
we look out here, it makes for good TV. Look around, though, and it actually makes people sick. So we need to integrate back in and reconnect, rekindle our relationship with organisms, with ecosystems. So that's one movement. And hopefully I can come back and talk about some, you know, how we can work with water, how we can work with air, and how we can work with fire. But for now, we understand that what we literally put soil in and soil comes back out. And if we interfere with that system, we interfere with our health.
I like it. I love it. So now let's give the listeners something like a little assignment. So like when we take our little dog Maggie, a little 10-pound dachshund, domesticated dachshund, for a walk, we walk down by the beach, and for as much as I can during that walk, I walk barefoot, whether it's on grass or down by the sand on the beach. And so let's challenge people to start walking a little bit barefoot as much as they can, and maybe growing some food. And like you said, I like the idea of bringing the actual soil into their house.
I like that.
Yeah, I would give a couple challenges. So one is to get out there barefoot. You know, if that's 2 seconds, awesome. That's a start. If that's 2 hours, even better. Mm-hmm. But get out there and walk somewhere barefoot. I could do a whole show on that. There's so much to say, but ultimately, there is actually a form of nutrition when you're barefoot or bare skin of any part of your body touches the ground. There's electronic nutrition that takes place. We actually pull electrons out of the ground. So this is really important. I'd also encourage people, if they want to really move forward with this, we're doing a challenge at Surthrival right now. You see this on our social networks. We're challenging people to learn one wild medicinal herb this year and one wild food this year, and to harvest both and to use them.
Oh, okay.
So you could start with something as simple as dandelion or something more exotic like shadbush. You know, you could determine for yourself, but you could probably just get on Google. Everybody's smart enough to get on Google now. We all know how to do this. And Google local foods, wild foods in your area, or wild medicinal plants that grow in your area. Find one. Make sure you've got the right thing. Do your diligence. You're a self-responsible person. Figure out how to harvest that thing and how to use it. That would really say, if you did one medicinal and one edible per season, once a year, before you know it, you're going to have a nice repertoire of wild foods that you know how to work with. And that's going to lead you towards greater health, and it's going to lead you towards greater health sovereignty.
What do you think about people doing that in the cities or in suburbia, where guys are walking around, spraying stuff, or there's car exhaust fumes blowing on, like maybe the dandelion that's growing out of the sidewalk? Would you just recommend I guess it would be okay as long as you washed it, or?
Well, it's a really good question. And I will say that I've spent some time in some cities. You know, one that comes to mind is I spent some time in Montreal, and I did quite a bit of foraging up in the Montreal Park, which was a nice park area, and there was quite a bit of amazing edibles growing wildly there. And so I have done that, and I know there are people like Steve Brill who lead wild food walks through New York City. So, I mean, there is stuff there. And I have kind of a question for you, which is, living in California and seeing where, you know, most of the country's organic produce comes out of California, right? Cal Organic, we call that industry. Mm-hmm. Since you live in California, do you think that the average person going into a health food store and buying produce that says organic on it is picturing the kind of places that are growing their food out there?
I don't think so. Not at all.
Yeah.
Not at all.
We
Not
picture
happening.
like, you know, old McDonald's farm. And in reality, these are big, mega polluted, ugly monocrop. I mean, they're not particularly healthy environments either. I have this kind of philosophy, which is that we do need to be incredibly careful about the toxins in our environment, but we also need to adapt. We also need to adapt to them, because there's not going to be some magic reset button that we get to push that eliminates all the pollutants from our world. So we're smart, right? We don't want to eat something that looks like it's in a ditch where all the road drainage is running off into. We don't want to eat something that we just saw a homeless guy pee on. But we
come on,
we
bacteria.
Well, yeah,
beneficial.
Well, actually, you're in sterile. But it's got salts.
You're right.
So we want to pick and choose. I think most people who live in cities have access to some kind of parkland or some kind of green area where they would feel comfortable eating stuff. So use your discretion. And even here where I live, you know, I live in a very wonderfully forested natural area. But of course, I'm not picking stuff out of my roadside ditches, because, you know, when it does rain here, you know, all that exhaust from cars and all of that rubber and all of that, you know, oil runs down into those areas. So I avoid that, and I choose things that make the most sense. And I think everybody can figure that piece out for themselves. And there's some, you know, fantastic books out there, fantastic resources, but it's always great to learn from somebody. So I'd recommend people look for wild food walks, or sometimes they're called herb walks, in their area. So again, wherever you live, you can kind of Google around and find people who are teaching and leading, so that you can get out with somebody and learn these plants in the field. That's incredibly helpful. And fantastic books, if I had to recommend any, would be the Forager's Harvest series, which is a fantastic couple of books.
Excellent. And I like that challenge where people can start walking now barefoot and start doing a little bit of wild food foraging, getting one medicinal and one herb, I think you mentioned. And I think that would be a good place because a lot of people, I think, listening to this are probably like me, where it's easy to walk barefoot, but then you got to take it to another level and do a little bit of research and figure out some foods that you can harvest in your local area.
Remember when we had our friends over to dinner a couple months ago?
Yep.
And they had told us that the night before, one of their dates was they went around the neighborhood trying to find dinner, and they picked enough things out of our natural surroundings and they ate it. And I just thought that was so cool. We have so much to learn even from people around us.
How is that for a first date?
I know, right?
That's so great.
Yeah.
And, one of the things that happens that a lot of people are not expecting maybe is going to happen is that when you learn a wild edible, this is going to maybe be a little touchy-feely here, but you meet a new organism that you didn't know before. So for most people, nature's like a wall of green. They're not really able to differentiate the different parts, right? Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden, when you know a plant, you start to see that plant in all its different locations. You start to notice that plant. And when you eat that plant, it's like this organism now. Mm-hmm. So if we're talking about wild lettuce, for instance, and you get into the habit of eating wild lettuce, you start to notice wild lettuce everywhere. And it's like you're seeing this friend of yours. You're out walking with somebody else and you're talking, and out of the corner of your eye, it's like, oh, there's my buddy over there, wild lettuce. It's like we call it a plant ally. It's more than just a resource. It's a living thing. It's an organism. It's a species. And now there's a symbiotic relationship between your species, because you love and know that organism and eat it for food. You'll always want to protect it.
Right.
And it knows you. And so there's a connection that's formed. Okay. And over time, as you develop more and more connections to these living things in your environment, you start to become friends and allies with your ecosystem. And this changes the way you see the world in a way that's so profound that it can't really be described, through an interview.
Right.
I like that
It's
idea.
an experiential knowledge that kind of just happens as a result of everything that you're talking about,
Yeah, and you go from feeling I think a lot of us feel like we're aliens on this planet. It's kind of like it's that disconnection thing. It's like we're not from here or something. Everything else is from here. We just showed up on this planet and we're bad for the earth. And you go from that mindset to starting to feel integrated. You know all these organisms and you're part of it with them, as opposed to the observer from outside.
That's a beautiful thing. Daniel, I know that this is a little bit off topic. Do you have time for one quick question?
Of course.
As we wrap up? Okay, cool.
Okay, let me get to it. This was a email. It says, "Hey there, guys. I'm a fan of your show. Thank you for all you're doing. Keep up the good work. I have a question for Daniel Vitalis when you have him on the show again. I have heard that there is a less or non-toxic way to get a tattoo. She's wondering about the inks and dyes used. Obviously, you have tattoos. She had tattoos done in the previous years, and now is aware of some possible health ramifications. Can you shed some light on the issue and possibly direct her on how to find a place in her area where she can get a safer tattoo done?" Annabelle from Georgia.
Hey, Annabelle. Let me dispel some mythology here.
Cool.
I don't typically talk much about my tattoos in my interviews, and so they've created there's this lore going. I've heard that my tattoos are made out of spirulina, or that I get tattooed with chlorella.
Oh man!
So the thing about tattoos, I've chosen the path of being a tattooed person, and I definitely haven't chosen that as a health strategy. It's something on a different level for me. Mm-hmm. So I definitely don't go around recommending people get tattoos for their health. Do I think there's health ramifications? It kind of depends. I've chosen to primarily be tattooed with black pigments, and part of that is that we can look back through time and see that black pigment tattoos go back really far in human history. We have this amazing example of the Iceman ice mummy that was excavated in the Alps in I think the late 80s. And he had 65 black tattoos. And so we know it goes really far back.
Wow.
And we know that there are cultures like the Maori who get these nearly full-bodied black tattoos, and they don't seem to be suffering health ramifications. So we know that that's at least been kind of borne out and proven out. I think the thing for people to be conscientious of is that a lot of the really bright especially fluorescent type pigments that are available now are not really tested. It's difficult to find out what they are. The tattoo world is not like the nutrition world in that there's not a lot of regulation on what the ingredient mix is. Keep in mind that tattoos are not ink, they are pigments, and that those pigments become embedded in collagen in your skin, and that they stay there, and that's what makes the tattoo stay there. There are certain colors that are likely contaminated with metals or even made out of metals. So red is a great example of something that, at least in the past, has been made with cinnabar and contain mercury. So need to be conscientious about this stuff. Blacks tend to be iron and carbon based, so they're a lot safer. Yet there's not really awesome alternatives right now where there's like some kind of organic tattoo pigment that's really been borne out and tested yet. So Annabelle, sorry, I don't have a great answer for you. People always say that I do. I don't know. I get asked this a lot, and
you should just lie. Chlorella.
People just make stuff up like that. I got tattooed with chlorella. So, cool. So there's not a great example. But what I will say that's been really important for me is that tattooing is a procedure where it's like I personally see it like a ceremony. So I get tattooed by somebody who also sees it like that. She approaches tattooing as a spiritual practice, not one of those kind of like biker bar places on the side of the road. So I think it's really important that you choose to work with somebody. You're doing a bloodletting ceremony. Essentially, you want to be working with somebody who's aligned with your values and in a place that feels good to you.
Gotcha.
Excellent.
Well, thanks for answering that.
Well, thank you, Daniel, for being on and spending, an hour and a half with us. We really appreciate that. It's amazing. Yeah,
thanks for letting me have an opportunity to share a big picture. I really appreciate it, and hope to be back on soon.
Yeah, no problem. Real quick, as we're closing up, is there any new projects you're working on? I know you got the Find a Spring thing that you're upgrading. Or is there anything else that you're kind of up to?
Well, that's actually a pretty big deal for us because the new Find a Spring website is light years ahead of what we had in place before. So people can expect a really functional, upgraded site. It's going to really help people access good, clean water in a new way. So that's really exciting. And I'm going to be launching some new products this season. And I'll just give a little hint right now. People can expect an incredible freeze-dried medicinal berry powder to be coming out from Survival really soon, which I'm incredibly excited about.
Wow.
So we're going to be continuing to launch new products as well. And like I mentioned, our 2013 Survival seed can is going to be available by the end of the week. So that's also something that's coming up.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, you have some really kind of cutting edge products, and they're kind of really unique. And you don't have hundreds of them. You only have a small handful of products. And that's one of the things that I like is that you really pour your heart and soul into the products that you do, and you're doing things in Myron glass and organic grape alcohol and these tinctures, an amazing process that you put into all of your products. I just think it's really, really cool. And I think we need more of you in the world doing products like this, just taking it to a whole new level to kind of make it more normal so that it's not really seen as that abnormal what you're doing,
People would be shocked if they saw how most of the supplements out there are made. I mean, it's pretty scary. So yeah, we do it right, or we do it the best we know how, and we really try to pass all that on to the people who support us. And I got to say, I mean, all the success we've had at Survival is due to the amazing client base we have, people who support us and use the products. So, thanks to everybody who's been buying from us and keeping us going, and we'll continue to launch out stuff that really can add value to your life.
Amazing.
Awesome.
Well, thank you so much, Daniel, for spending some time again with us, man. And we really, really appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you guys. Great to be on.
Okay,
Daniel.
Have a good day, Daniel. Oh, man, that was a cool interview, wasn't it?
Gosh darn it, I like that guy.
He's so cool.
He's so cool.
Yeah, I just feel like, you get such a unique perspective on everything when you talk to him.
Right.
And I love his real kind of folder mentality, or his folder idea where, earth, air, fire, and water, and you can just kind of categorize all of health. I was wondering when he was talking, how is he going to be talking about how do we eliminate fire? I don't get that.
Yeah.
I was wondering how, but it makes sense with the infrared way, right, and the sweat,
Yeah. Again, I was wondering that too, and I thought, of course, he's going to come up with something that I've never thought of. And the minute he said it, I'm like, that makes so much sense.
Yeah, he's a talented speaker, and
my gosh,
he's really eloquent, and Amazing.
He has an extraordinary way of just turning the average, both thought and way that we do life, into something that makes sense in an extraordinary way.
It's such a unique perspective, but yet so simple, Yeah.
He's amazing.
So I'm going to do that. I already do as much barefoot walking as I can, and it would have been really nice to get into that. Perhaps we can do that on another show with him, where we can talk about the benefits of walking barefoot, because I know there's a photonic exchange that happens, and as far as the electrons that come off of the earth and the Schumann resonance and some of that stuff that comes up through our feet and all of that. And so, but on top of that, there's a direct connection between your muscles and your brain and how your brain functions when you walk barefoot. I mean, it's a really deep thing.
I would love to touch more on that, because that's something that you and I have added into our daily life now. And
we're going to be walking around barefoot everywhere.
Be those walking around barefoot earthy people, eating clay for breakfast.
Clay and enzymes.
and dandelion root. Out of our sidewalk.
That's one thing that I'd like to do, is maybe figure out ways to get some dandelion, because we see it from time to time.
Yeah. It's definitely around town.
So we're going to take up that challenge. Hopefully you are too. And so I hope you enjoyed this show. And if you can, we were really excited about how it came out. It was really good. We're going to edit some of the things out of there, some of the poor quality sound, and we apologize for that. But if you want to share this interview with your friends or people, your family, people that you are interested in and love and think they might benefit from them, please share this show with them, either through Facebook by liking this show page, which is extremehealthradio.com/93, or just sending the URL, the link, to your friends via email. Either way, that would be really a great help. And don't forget to check out our store. And if you want to buy any of his products, go through our link. If you would, that would be a real great way to support us. extremehealthradio.com/Surthrival. It's SURTHRIVAL, Surthrival. And that will just redirect you to their site. And anytime you make a purchase, we'll get a little commission too.
Yes.
And what else? Lots of stuff on our site. But anyway, this interview has gone long and don't want to keep you forever. So I think that's it, right?
I think so.
Is that all the business we have to take care of?
Yeah, now we got to take Maggie out to take care of her business.
Take care of Maggie's business.
That's what dogs do.
It's actually really sunny out there right now. I think
the sun came out, the birds are chirping.